Welcome to World at Work TV. I'm Alison Avalos, and I'm here today with Kerry Chou, and we're talking about the recently published World at Work Salary Budget Survey. Kerry, just to kind of kick us off with some conversation about high-level findings and focusing on the U.S., we know that salary budgets have come in at 3% for 2014 and are projected to hit 3.1% for next year. And this isn't really eye-popping news. We've seen a slow trend for a number of years. There continues to be a slight amount of growth in salary budgets or planned pay increases year over year. One of the things I wanted to mention is that we, for a number of years now, have kind of been looking back at the 2009 recession and what that meant in terms of pay planning. And for a number of years, we were thinking about this recovery. I think it's important now to really kind of look independently at where we stand today. What happened in 2009 and 10 and what was reflected in our data was really an increase, a huge increase in the number of organizations who froze their pay increase or froze their salaries. They were not able to deliver any pay increases. So we had a high instance of zeros in our data, which caused our average figures and median figures to drop significantly. Those folks are back to their normal pay practices. We have very few zeros in our data. We know very few organizations are freezing budgets at the current time. So now that we sit around this perhaps new normal of 3%, sort of begs the question, why isn't it growing more? And I think what we've talked about a lot internally is really the absence of other pressures on wages. Budgets are growing year over year, but there isn't anything in the marketplace causing organizations to have to do a lot more than this 3% or so in terms of pay increases.
Yeah, you're right, Allison. Certainly when we look at some of the other key economic indicators, unemployment, consumer price index, at least here in the United States, of course, unemployment, we've seen a slow decrease from the historic levels that we saw during the recession. We're down now to about 6%, so that is certainly an improvement, although many experts would agree that part of the drop in the unemployment is not necessarily that people are getting back to work, but that long-time unemployed persons have simply dropped out from looking. So I think unemployment is generally coming down. We still have a lot of people that are unemployed. As far as the consumer price index is concerned, we've seen a slight uptick year over year in the consumer price index. It's about 2%, but historically speaking, 2% is still, from a monetary policy standpoint, very reasonable. And so to your point, I don't think we're really seeing a lot of continued upward pressure or a need for organizations to have to increase their budget simply because we still have a lot of people unemployed out there. Consumer prices are relatively modest. And so for the time being, I think that that wages will probably continue sort of their slow but modest upward trajectory. To your kind of question regarding is this the new normal? Are we never going to return back to the 3.5–4.5% budgets that we saw prior to the recession? I think the jury's still out. In terms of sort of how the market plays out, to the extent that we do get that upward pressure, that unemployment continues to fall, perhaps we see some upward movement in consumer prices, then there's no reason to think wages are artificially frozen at this 3% level. I would expect them to return back to whatever is necessary to keep the market in balance.
So for the time being, organizations are able to attract and retain the talent they need with moderately sized pay increases, in addition to whatever else they're doing to reward employees, which I think is an important note to make. When we talk about the market, we also publish data on salary structures, and we know that those levels are kind of back at historic levels. For 2014, the average was 1.9%. For 2015, we're looking at 2.1. So not a huge, there's been a rebound certainly since the recession, but not a huge amount of change there, and we don't typically see that. It's not like salary budgets that have a tendency to grow even slightly in size year over year. And it's interesting, I think, to have the conversation about the marketplace. During the recession, there was a lot of conversation about how the market wasn't moving. Organizations were obviously freezing pay. They may have set aside their efforts to benchmark against their industries and against their labor market ultimately. Have things recovered in that regard? Would you say the market is moving at a more typical pace now based on what we're seeing with salary structure adjustments?
I think, Allison, yes, that for all intents and purposes, most organizations have returned to a normal schedule. I mean, we've moved away, we're 5 years down the road from the what are we going to do? We've got to freeze our structures, no increases for 1, 2, or more years. Employees have returned to having an expectation that there's going to be an annual increase, or at least an increase on whatever organization's normal periodic schedule is. And we've seen a salary structure movement return back to, as you mentioned, kind of the 2% level. So I think, at least from an expectation, both from an employee and an employer standpoint, we certainly have returned back, maybe not to the level of increases we saw prior to the recession, but certainly that normal schedule where year in and year out, employees are expecting that they're going to receive something.
And the survey data sort of underscores that when we look at prevalence of market adjustments, because there was certainly a drop-off in the use of those programs during and after the recession. We've seen quite a climb since 2010, 2011 in the use of market adjustments. In fact, we're about 75%, 74%, which is higher than where we were pre-recession. So I think when you look at that data in context and combined with what we're seeing in structure adjustments, maybe there's something exciting on the horizon.
Yes, perhaps. I think one of the advantages that we've talked about, Allison, many times in the past is the key advantage, or one of the key advantages to variable pay, is that ability for you to provide a one-time payment or incentive to an employee without having it roll into base salary, which is a gift that keeps on giving, as we've said. So the fact that more employers are increasing the use of these kind of retention bonuses, sign-on bonuses, project bonuses, may be a precursor to more concerted activity in terms of salary budgets in the future, as there's key employees, there's hot talent employees that are sort of, as the economy warms up, as the labor market warms up, they're more at risk of leaving for other organizations, and organizations, I think, are cognizant of that. So we have seen, as you've mentioned, an increase in those types of activities. To your point about market adjustments, now we know that those types of increases are going into an employee's base pay, so those will be ongoing expenses for employers. But one of the advantages to those is those are typically one-off kinds of payments. So we have this individual who is at risk of leaving, so we better provide them a market adjustment. This person needs a market adjustment. And the fact that we're seeing more of those, I think, is indicative that the labor market is starting to warm up, keeping in mind that those are one-off payments. And maybe at some point in the future, as those continue to increase, that is going to spill over in terms of general salary budget increases that may occur in the future, and that remains to be seen.
Thanks, Kerry. For more on the WorldatWork Salary Budget Survey and related resources, please visit our website. For World at Work TV, I'm Alison Avalos.